last thing I would like to do today is try to either vindicate or exonerate him. We must also start this, exploration about what happened in Marathon with two parameters in mind. Herodotus is not a military historian. He doesn't really care about the military details. He doesn't find them appealing. And more importantly, he thinks that his audience will not find it appealing. The second, and this perhaps is what hurts to admit, is the fact that he's the only one we really got. Most of the accounts, or anything that has been written in our ancient sources, in our ancient texts about the Battle of Marathon, are, let's face it, one way or the other, invariably based on the account of Herodotus. Now, the way in which we can treat his account, we'll basically see with regard, or in the next few minutes in this presentation. Now, before that, I'd just like to spend a few minutes and try to tell you a few things, or basically focus on the events or the factors that led to the confrontation between Athens and Sparta. And in this case, I will probably have to go all the way back to the Ionian Revolt of 499, where the city-states, the Greek city-states within the Persian Empire in Asia Minor, decide to stage a widespread revolt against Persian domination, mostly under the exploits or the expediency of Aristogoras, the tyrant indeed of Miletus. Now, Aristogoras, as you guys can imagine, spent a considerable amount of time within Greece trying to recruit support for the cause. Most of the Greek city-states were sympathetic to the cause, but nevertheless short of any actual military commitment, owing probably to the fact that you really do not want to mess with the Persians at this particular point in time. The Spartans, it's quite interesting, toyed with the idea, because you guys probably know about the movie 300, give them a fight and those guys are pretty much at the forefront of everything. So they toyed with the idea. They even at some point considered, until the golden moment where the king of Sparta, Cleomenes, asked Aristogoras, so where do you want us to march again? Oh, it's Ionia. It's not far away. It's just going to take you 1 month to march there, another month to march back. The Spartans are still laughing. For people, the Spartans especially, that thought that a trip to Argos in the Peloponnese was a trip to another universe, having them dislocated from the area of Peloponnese all the way to Ionia was pretty much absurd. As a result, Aristogoras was sent packing. The Athenians, however, thought that this might be a good opportunity for them not only to establish or to spread their influence within Asia Minor, the Greek city-states, but also, quite importantly, to secure the shipment of grain. Maybe some of you will know that Athens had to rely on the continuous shipments of grain and wheat all the way from the Black Coast, following the relief of the Greek coastline and down to Athens. So this might obviously have made them, or made these shipments much indeed safer and much more prolific into their actual volume. However, typical as it is in Athenian politics, the political will is there. However, the military commitment, far from it. The Athenians, along with their loyal sidekicks, the Eretrians, this is Eretria in Euboea, and we'll see it on the map in just a few minutes, decided to send a massive expeditionary force of 25 triremes. That was, in fact, sarcastic. 25 triremes, and no more than a few hundred marines that were based upon them. That was the military commitment of both Athens and Eretria. Initially, the rebels, essentially, the Ionian city-states in Asia Minor, managed to gain headway, even resulting down to the destruction of Sardis. Sardis, you might consider, is the political center of the Anatolian or the Asia Minor satrapies of the Persian Empire. That is, of course, the burning down of the lower city, not the Acropolis. A Persian counteroffensive within the next year meant that the entire Athenian and Eretrian expedition was basically over. The Athenians and the Eretrians were ejected from Asia Minor, which means that they had to leave their Ionian brethren pretty much to the whim and will of the Persians. The Battle of Lada in 493 was a decisive one, pretty much bringing the revolt to an end, and it took another year of brutal mopping operations to see that the Ionian revolt was basically put to death. Now, as you can imagine, this would serve as an actual insult. That is the way that the great king of Persia at the time, Darius, thought of it, especially in light of the fact that about, 10 years before that, the Athenians, in a rather bizarre incident, which I'll be happy to talk in just, or later on after the talk itself, had in fact offered a token submission of earth and water to the Persians. For them, or in this case for the great king of Persia, Darius, this was a question of the prestige of the Persian Empire. This was a question where insubordinate people should be taught a lesson. Already at that point, he vows to avenge the Athenians and the Eretrians for what they did. He even, according to Herodotus, had one of his servants 3 times a day before each and every meal tell him, "Sire, do not forget about the Athenians." 492, and indeed his wish or his dream comes true, where he puts Mardonius, and this indeed is his brother-in-law, in charge of the first expedition launched against Greece. Now, under all accounts, the expedition of Mardonius is considered to be a fiasco, and if you think about the actual outcome, yes, it is. The poor guy had to deal indeed with a defeat at the hands of the Thracians. Given the geographical area where he was defeated by the Thracians, I tend to think that it must be talking about Scordisci, but that's in fact not important right now. And later on, the destruction of his fleet off Mount Athos, where it also states specifically that he lost 300 ships and 20,000 men, meant that the entire expedition was basically over before it began. A fiasco, yes, but at the same time, if you think of it within the wider perspective, his actual expedition resulted in the resubjugation of Thrace and the submission of the kingdom of Macedonia. And this would prove very crucial, especially in the form of the logistical lines, for the expedition of Xerxes in 480, the second expedition, of course, of the Persians against Greece probably in this case. By 491, Mardonius is back home, back to Asia, but it would only take 1 year, in fact by May 490, for Darius to launch a new expedition. The first thing, as you guys can see, this time was going to be spearheaded by the heavy guns, Datis and Artaphernes. Artaphernes is indeed his brother-in-law, if I'm not mistaken. His brother-in-law. Datis is actually the local commander, Median by origin. He has already distinguished himself during the expedition or the campaigns of Darius up north in the area of the Balkan Peninsula, near indeed the mouth of the Danube. The one thing that was decided this time, we're not going to play along with a land war operation. This one is going to be completely a maritime operation. We are going to load troops on a boat and we're going to ship them directly over to Athens and to Eretria. In itself, this represents the actual scope of the operation, a punitive expedition designed primarily to teach those two city-states an actual lesson. And here's where the plot begins. He gathers his fleet in the area of Mycale. This is essentially in the southeast Anatolian coast by the Aegean. All good so far, but this has been one of the biggest problems that any military historian has had to deal with regard to the Battle of Marathon. How many of them are there? Just that simple. If you guys notice, these are some of the quotes that have been put down by our ancient sources. Herodotus, cryptic as usual, is very enlightening. 600 ship, well packed. That's all I can give you. This is actually a little surprising, considering that in the second expedition, the second Persian expedition by Xerxes, he spends an entire chapter enumerating down to the very, not necessarily accurately, but enumerating down to the very last man all of the forces that Xerxes brought with him. This time, as I said, as cryptic as ever. We have Simonides, who's an actual contemporary to the events, who claims a figure of 200,000, followed by a Roman source of the 1st century BC, Cornelius Nepos. Then on, you see Plutarch, Pausanias. The Suda dictionary is essentially a lexicon. It's a dictionary of the 10th century AD. And as you can see, they all provide figures of 300,000. Plato Lysias 500,000, and Justin Gall lists them 600,000 men. Now, the discrepancy that you guys tend to see within the numbers of provided by ancient sources is obviously continued with regard to the modern estimates. Here indeed is the holy grail for anyone dealing with military history. Where you guys can see again a variation starting from the extremely low, 16 to 18,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry, down to the rather high, 60 to 100,000 troops. You can immediately dismiss the lower figures. Simple. The Persians never take to the field unless some sort of, I'm not going to say numerical superiority, but at least up to the point where numbers will make sure, strength in numbers will make sure that this is a quick and decisive engagement. Just that simple.